I was the assistant, the scheduler, the girl who smiled, poured champagne, and signed the NDAs. But behind the freak-offs, behind the offshore wires, behind the velvet curtains and glass floors, I was also the blueprint. They studied me, programmed me, broke me into body patterns and persuasion models, all to test how deep control could go. Julian Saint was a god in the music industry. Vesna was his secret weapon. I was supposed to be loyal, but I watched a girl die, and I found footage of myself being studied like a rat in an influence lab. This isn't just a story. It's a weapon, and if you're listening, you're already inside it. If you think you've heard it all, you haven't. Hit follow on your favorite platform now, because the next story might just change the way you see everything. Don't miss a single twisted turn. The introduction. They say you always remember the first time you meet a monster, but I didn't. Not really. When I first shook Julian Saint's hand, he didn't feel like a predator. He felt like an opportunity, and that's the first manipulation. Not what he did to me, what I did to myself. It was 3:14 p.m. on a Tuesday in Manhattan. I remember the exact time because I was watching the second hand on my cracked fossil watch, wondering how many minutes I had left on my lunch break. I was an intern at Reverb Group back then, an audio lifestyle brand run by 2 influencers and 1 silent investor. That investor was Julian Saint. The only time I'd ever seen his face was in blurry party photos or rap documentary clips where people whispered about the man behind the man. He was the type of rich that didn't need Instagram, the kind of famous that made other famous people nervous. I was delivering a folder, something boring, something I'd forgotten the moment I stepped into his suite at the Mercer. The room was dim, cold, and smelled like cardamom and $1,000 cologne. He didn't look up at first, just gestured for me to drop it on the desk. His voice was low, warm, practiced. You always move like you're being watched. You're not wrong. I froze. He looked up, and I swear I felt my whole nervous system rearrange itself. Julian Saint had the kind of face that looked different every time you glanced at it. Sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, always calculated. He pointed to the seat across from him, and I sat, not because I wanted to, but because he expected it. He asked my name. I told him. Elena, he repeated like he was filing me. What are you good at? I said admin, scheduling, coordination, all the usual intern bullshit. He smiled. No, what are you really good at? That was the first test. Over the next 11 minutes, he did something I didn't even recognize until years later. He ran a live psychological scan. He asked about my family, my boundaries, my ambitions. Not directly, in roundabout ways, reverse logic, humor, and vulnerable storytelling. He called it game exploration. I thought we were vibing. I thought I impressed him. But now I know better. He wasn't impressed. He was calculating. Julian Saint was a master of persuasion methods, market emotions, and group dynamics. Every room was a test. Every interaction a transaction. He'd once told someone, I don't hire resumes, I hire leverage. The next morning, I got a text from a blocked number. Position open. Discretion required. 10x compensation. Reply yes to proceed. I replied yes in less than a minute. I didn't ask what the position was. Didn't care. Because I was 23, broke, and addicted to the idea of access. Day 1 at St. Corp didn't feel like onboarding. It felt like entering a cult. There was no HR paperwork. No training. No handbook. Just a key card, a non-disclosure agreement the length of a novel, and a whispered phrase from his head of security. We do what he needs, not what he wants. That phrase would echo in my head for years. Because Julian Saint didn't want sex, drugs, or money. He already had those. What he wanted was control. And I was about to help him build the most engineered empire of psychological manipulation the industry had ever seen. It started with emails, then call sheets, then hotel room reservations, then women. My title was Executive Operations Specialist. But what I really became was the ethical mitigator of power and filth. The girl who made the freak-offs look like harmless networking mixers. The one who signed off the offshore accounts with wellness retreat codes. The one who handled client breakdowns with cognitive techniques and veiled sedatives. The silence maker. The handler. The ghost behind the glass. And the more I did, the more I was rewarded. My apartment doubled in size. My shoes got more expensive. The way people looked at me, with fear and curiosity, turned me on. I told myself I was doing it for the future. That I was just playing the game. That I was controlling the chaos. But I was feeding it. They don't teach you about true body intelligence in college. About how power doesn't always feel like violence. Sometimes it feels like seduction. Like influence. Like being special. Until you wake up one day and realize you don't remember who you were before the money started wiring into your account every Friday. They call them victims now. But back then we just called them guests. And I was the host. Freak Off Fridays. The first time I organized a freak off, I thought it was just a party. A weird, high-end VIP-style after-party, sure, but still just a party. Julian never called it that, of course. He said it was a private vibe. Said it with that smile of his. The one that curled just at the corners like he knew your secrets before you did. And maybe he did. The invite list was always whispered. No emails. No texts. Just a phrase dropped in a voice note, or a signed envelope passed by a runner. It's Friday. Same shadows. That meant freak off night. That meant I had 48 hours to source the girls, prep the penthouse, wipe the cameras, and rehearse the lies. Julian's penthouse in Soho looked like a music mogul's wet dream. Glass floors, art exploration pieces that were never signed, a server room hidden behind a fake bookcase, and a sound system that could manipulate mood using low-frequency audio engineering techniques. He'd invested in audio manipulation tech from some Israeli startup. Said sound could mitigate inhibition. Whatever the hell that meant. All I knew was, once the beat hit, people forgot who they were. And that was the point. The girls? They came from all over, dancers, influencers, PR interns, models fresh off a PS1 event, sometimes just women trying to get studio time. Julian had a type. Naive, hungry, unattached. He'd say, no boyfriends. No fathers. No one who's gonna miss them by Monday. I made calls. Sometimes I'd meet them for tea first. Sometimes I lied and said I was casting for a video. I hated how good I got at it. Influence psychology in stilettos. The contracts came next. NDAs, waivers, photo consents, all tucked into leather folders lined in velvet. Legalized manipulation. That's what I called it in my head. One girl once asked, "Why does it feel like I'm selling my soul?" I smiled and said, "Because you're not reading the fine print." The night of? He'd want the lighting just right, yellow gold dimmers, a mirror ball over the jacuzzi, and blue LED strips under the floors. Color psychology for the emotions in market behavior, he said. He spoke like a Wall Street cult leader in a silk robe. By midnight, the energy would shift. Phones were taken. Cameras turned off. But the server room kept recording. Always. Julian watched from the shadows. Sometimes he'd join. Sometimes he'd whisper instructions to me in an earpiece like he was directing a movie. Have her dance slower. Put her on the red couch. Record audio from mic 2. And I did it. Because I was the engineer of the illusion. But the worst part? It worked. The women laughed. They danced. They kissed each other under the scent of rosewood smoke and dark forces they couldn't see. They called it the most beautiful night of their lives. And then they cried in the morning. Quietly. Alone. And left with gift bags stuffed with signed NDAs, prepaid cards, and Uber codes. Julian's words stuck with me that first night as I scrubbed the cameras and deleted the mirror angles from the server. Society rewards control, not honesty. You're doing God's work, Elena, in the shadows of justice. I didn't know it then, but that phrase would haunt me. Shadows of justice. How many women did we bury under that? I was the gatekeeper of the freak-offs. A handler with a halo. I told myself it was art. I told myself it was survival. I told myself it was success. But it was manipulation in its purest form. And my hands were neck-deep in it. The server room. They say power corrupts. But they never tell you how quiet the corruption sounds when it's downloading in 4K behind bulletproof glass. The server room wasn't on any floor plan. You didn't find it unless Julian wanted you to. And even then, it was never called a server room. It was the archive. You entered through a biometric lock hidden behind a bookshelf inside the penthouse studio. 3 steps in and you could feel it. The buzz of 1,000 lies being backed up in real time. The first time I went in, I felt like I was walking into a submarine built by a voyeur god. Temperature, 64 degrees. Lighting, ice blue. The walls, lined with matte black hard drives blinking like digital eyes. Some labeled with initials. Some with nothing at all. A single screen pulsed in the center. That was his terminal. Julian's throne of surveillance. On it, I saw footage from 17 different angles of the last freak-off. Every laugh, every kiss, every whispered breakdown in the hallway. It was like watching a movie I produced without knowing I'd been the director. Memory is fallible, he said behind me. But video? Video never lies. That's why I keep it. He walked in wearing a black hoodie and bare feet. No security. No hesitation. Just power cloaked in casual decay. He told me the server room ran on triple encryption. Backed up to 3 offshore data farms, Belize, Ukraine, and Dubai. Redundant. Distributed. Untouchable. Data is control, he whispered. You think I keep these for leverage? I keep them for truth. The raw, unedited human. The psychology before the mask. He called it his lab of human dynamics. And I believed him. That night, he let me review and classify footage. He was testing my pattern recognition. I sat with headphones on, skimming through hours of silent footage, looking for moments. Not sex. Not scandal. But cracks. The girl who hesitated at the door. The artist who drank too fast. The executive who smiled too wide at the camera. Julian said those cracks were market signals. Evidence of behavioral psychology in the raw. Everyone thinks I throw parties for sex. I throw them for data. Over time, I started to understand what he meant. Each freak-off was a controlled experiment. Variables introduced. Drugs measured. Responses recorded. Julian even had a folder marked Celestial Insights. Astrology overlays comparing behavior to moon phases. It was dark science disguised as luxury. He showed me the silent mic files. Audio captured from deep-placed mics under cushions on wine glasses, even in lipstick tubes. I once heard a girl whisper, "I think I'm being watched," while unzipping her boots. She was right. But here's what broke me. One day I found footage of myself. Not from a party. Not from work. From my apartment. Me alone. Cooking eggs. Wearing boxers. Talking to myself. I stared at the footage for 7 full minutes. Then Julian spoke from behind me again. "You're the best data set I have. Watching you helps me predict everyone else." That night, I cried in the elevator. But not from fear. From recognition. I wasn't just in the empire. I was its blueprint. I began to learn the architecture of control. Audio manipulation to influence decision-making mid-party. Scent dispersal systems rigged to enhance compliance. Light modulations designed using cognitive techniques from military psyops. Legal filters embedded in every NDA, tailored to the individual's trauma profile. It wasn't a party empire. It was a behavioral laboratory. At some point, I stopped being horrified. I started getting good at it. I developed my own tags, my own color coding system, my own methods. I even started running my own tests without telling him. That's when I knew I was lost. The last file I archived that night was labeled MK Vesna. It was Julian's hidden mistress, the one who trained me in nonverbal persuasion, NLP, and body intelligence. I hadn't met her yet, but her shadow already ruled the room. They say monsters are born, but I know better. They're engineered, one encrypted backup at a time. And I was building them. Offshore wires and broken women. There's a sound I'll never forget. Not a scream. Not a gunshot. It's softer than that. More hollow. It's the sound of a girl's head hitting marble tile. A dry, wet thud like a body remembering gravity. Her name was Raina. She was 19. Fresh off a one-way flight from Atlanta, chasing her first single and her last dream. And she died at Julian's freak-off on a Sunday night. The invite had been last minute. Julian said he liked her fire. What he meant was she was pretty, broke, and emotionally combustible. I picked her up myself in the black Escalade. She was wearing thigh-high boots and a pink wig. Said she felt like a star in someone else's movie. I smiled, because that's exactly what she was. The party that night was different. Not bigger, colder. Fewer guests. More surveillance. Julian was testing something new. Market manipulation in isolation states. I didn't ask what that meant. He called it a small room scenario. No alcohol. Just branded elixirs he'd sourced from a Swiss lab and relabeled with gold lettering. Influentia. He said it was bio-aligned to human behavior. I said nothing, because the wires had already hit. $90,000 wired offshore to a shell account in Luxembourg that morning. The same account we used for wellness retreats and creative wellness evaluations. By 2:11 a.m., Raina was naked, crying, and shaking, curled up near the LED fireplace. No one noticed. Everyone else was dancing to silence. The music had stopped 10 minutes earlier. She looked up at me like she was underwater. "I feel like someone's inside my skin," she whispered. That's when she collapsed. I froze. Just for a second. Long enough to hear that sound again. Head on tile. Julian was already moving, snapping his fingers at a medic we kept on staff. He told me, "Clean her up. Call it heat stroke. Move her to Suite E." She wasn't dead. Not yet. But she never spoke again. The next morning, I was sent to manage the optics. That meant her phone was wiped, her Instagram deleted, and her manager, if he even was her manager, got a wire labeled studio buyout fee. And that was it. Another shadowed secret, filed and forgotten. But it wasn't gone for me. I kept hearing her voice in my head. I feel like someone's inside my skin. I started to wonder what was inside mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the server room. And I watched the footage. Every frame. Not of the party, of me. Me handing her the drink. Me laughing at her joke. Me saying, "You're gonna be a star tonight." It felt like watching someone else. Like I was watching a con artist in heels. One with no soul left. And then the shaking started. Full body tremors. Not fear. Not even panic. Recognition. That's the worst part of manipulation. When you finally realize you're the villain in someone else's trauma. Julian came into the server room around 4:20 a.m. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't ask what I was watching. He just handed me a folder labeled Vesna, Phase 2. Inside, offshore wire instructions. More NDAs. One labeled with my name. And a note. For your silence. For your skill. For your loyalty. There was a wire for $250,000 pending from an offshore account in Qatar. And a key card to a new penthouse in Hudson Yards. I signed it. And I hated myself for how fast I did. But that was the moment the cracks started. In my mind. In my ethics. In my identity. I started asking questions I never should have. Started searching files I never had access to. Started wondering if Reina was the first, or just the first I noticed. The hidden mistress. I'd heard her name whispered for months. Sometimes in the server room logs. Sometimes buried in offshore routing instructions. Sometimes in Julian's sleep. Vesna. No last name. No address. No official record. Just Vesna. Like a myth. Or a trigger. The first time I saw her, she wasn't announced. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She just walked into Julian's penthouse like it belonged to her. In stilettos, a cream trench coat, and a violet silk scarf that looked like it had been soaked in perfume and sin. Her hair was silver. Not gray. Silver. Deliberate, calculated, gleaming like a blade. She looked at me, and I swear she smirked with her eyes. So this is the girl who cries after parties. I didn't answer. Because I couldn't. Because something in me, something deep and feral, felt seen. Not admired. Not respected. Just exposed. Julian didn't speak much in her presence. He deferred. Not submissive, obedient. Like a student. Or a soldier. That night, I found a folder waiting for me in my suite. It was black. No logo. Just a name on the tab. Vesna, File 11. Inside were pages of handwritten notes. My voice analysis. My eye tracking during meetings. My posture while lying. A full psychological profile with terms I didn't understand. Nonverbal recalibration loops. Cognitive body disruption. Emotional leverage arcs. It was me, broken into body intelligence fragments and behavioral algorithms. She had studied me without ever meeting me. And then came the invitation. A white envelope. Scented. No return address. 11 p.m., the Red Room. Do not speak unless asked. Do not look away. The Red Room was real. Julian had it built in a brownstone in Brooklyn. Padded walls, amber lighting, cameras in the vents. It wasn't a sex dungeon. It was a psychological theater. And Vesna was the director. She sat across from me on a velvet chaise. 2 glasses of red wine. One untouched. You're not here to learn. You're here to unlearn. Loyalty isn't enough. Loyalty breaks. But programming? Programming lasts. She told me she was a former intelligence operative. Psychops. NLP specialist. Trained in dark psychology, group manipulation, and cognitive warfare. She said Julian was her field experiment. And I was the next one. The first lesson was silence. For 3 hours, I sat in front of her. Naked, not physically but emotionally. She watched every blink, every shift, every breath. Corrected me when I scratched my arm unconsciously. Called it involuntary mitigation behavior. She touched my knee once and said, "That twitch is where your shame lives." By midnight, I felt peeled open. I'd never been touched. Never been kissed. But I felt violated and aroused all at once. Like she had fingerprinted my soul. Over the next few weeks, Vesna trained me. Not with books, with methods. Eye-anchoring drills to break male dominance. Scent body triggers to collapse resistance. Voice frequency training to exploit trauma responses. Breath control exercises to override ethical panic. It wasn't seduction. It was reprogramming. She kissed me once. No warning. No emotion. Just contact. As if to say, you are mine now. I let her. Not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to understand her power. And in that understanding, I became her. I started whispering things Julian never expected. Started making suggestions he thought were his own. Started rerouting the offshore wires under Vesna's command. And slowly, I started to see the fractures in the kingdom. Vesna told me one night over ice wine. There's no such thing as control, Elena. Only leverage. Power is the story people are too scared to speak. And you, my dear, are about to tell it. I asked her why she was training me. She smiled. Because Julian betrayed me. And I don't forgive. I rewire. I didn't know then. But the war had already begun. And I was the weapon. Escape plan. It started with a name I didn't recognize. E.Cruz.exe. Buried in a corner of the server. Behind layers of encryption I wasn't supposed to access. I only found it because the file path included the word mitigation. A keyword Vesna drilled into me. Mitigation means control. Of the body. Of the truth. Of me. I decrypted the file in the early hours of a Monday morning. Julian was in Dubai, Vesna was off-grid. And for the first time in months, I was alone with the machine. What I saw broke something permanent. Footage. Of me. Not just from the penthouse. From my college dorm. My childhood church. My bedroom 6 years ago, curled up after my mother's funeral. Dates. Times. Biometrics. Stress response overlays. Psychographic patterning models. I wasn't Julian's assistant. Or Vesna's student. I was the template. The source code. The original test subject for their influence mastery system. Everything I thought I'd built was a simulation of control crafted around my responses. There were folders labeled. Persuasion Layer A. Elena Emotional Sequence. Cognitive Behavior Loop. Cruz 19. Sexual Threshold Conditioning. Third cycle complete. They weren't training me. They were monitoring my programming. I slammed the monitor shut and threw up in the trash bin. Not out of disgust. Out of grief. For the girl I used to be. For the woman I had become. For the truth I could no longer ignore. I called Vesna. She didn't answer. I texted. What am I? No reply. An hour later, a new folder appeared on the screen. Do not open until you're ready. I didn't open it. Not then. Because I already knew. I made my decision the next morning. Escape wasn't a place. It was an act of war. Step 1. Cover tracks. I rerouted all my passwords through a private shell company I'd set up months earlier. True Body Intelligence Consulting. It had no clients. No services. Just one function, access. Step 2. Archive everything. I copied the entire Julian Saint archive. All the freak-offs. All the offshore wire trails. All the dead girls. Encrypted. Partitioned. Uploaded to 4 decentralized vaults. If anything happened to me, the footage would be released to every major media outlet and whistleblower subreddit within 72 hours. Step 3. Silence. I disappeared. Not physically, digitally. Erased every social trace. Burned every cloud key. Walked past Julian's security like I was still under orders. Because I'd learned the most powerful social engineering tactic of all. Pretend the spell is still working. But I wasn't pretending. I was building a noose. Made of receipts. And secrets. And the whispers they thought I'd forgotten. 3 weeks later, I got an alert. Vault 2 compromised. Someone tried to access it from Vesna's location. She knew. So did Julian. That night, my apartment door was ajar. Inside, nothing was touched. Except one thing. The red scarf Vesna wore the first night I met her. Hung on my chair. Folded. There was a USB on top. Inside the USB was a full video file of my first NDA signing. Julian smiling. Me crying. A second camera angle, showing Vesna watching from behind the mirror. And a voiceover I hadn't heard before. Julian's voice. She'll break when she sees herself. That's always the final fracture. That's when she becomes loyal or a liability. So I became neither. I became the narrator. And now I'm telling everything. Because this empire? This labyrinth of influence and sex and behavioral engineering? It's already collapsing. Shadowed secrets. They thought I'd disappear. That I'd go quietly. That I'd accept the hush money, the scarlet penthouse, the 3 offshore accounts wrapped in gold-accented wire transfers, and art techniques labeled retention bonuses. But when you've been manipulated by the best con artists in the world, the only real revenge is telling the truth with surgical precision. The archive had been copied, vaulted, laced with timers, triggers, and social contagion points. I didn't need a press conference. I didn't need a lawyer. I needed one drop, one leak, at the perfect time, to the perfect person. And I chose a disgraced behavioral psychologist turned podcaster with 800 followers and nothing left to lose. He posted one frame of the footage. One. Julian Saint's face, half in shadow, half smiling, caught in a frame beside a trembling woman wrapped in a velvet robe. It wasn't explicit. It wasn't illegal. But it was undeniable. Within 3 hours, it had 2.7 million views. By the next morning, a senator's daughter came forward. An ex-boy band lead posted cryptic emojis. 2 shell companies collapsed. A hacked ledger file from the Qatari wire trail was published in full. Julian's empire wasn't under investigation. It was under siege. He called me once. Blocked number. You think you're the hero, but you're just another variable in the system. You were always designed to burn. I didn't reply, because he was half right. I was designed to burn, but not for them. For the ones who didn't make it out. For Reina. For every woman labeled mitigation case in those red folders. And Vesna? She never surfaced. But I saw her shadow in a mirror once, walking through a Tokyo airport, scarf wrapped like memory, gaze blank. She never looked at me. She didn't have to. The media circus went global. Influence and art. Power and control. All the buried bylines began to resurface. Podcasts. Leaks. Disgraced executives. Archived contracts. A bloody USB found in a Venice hotel. And me. I wasn't safe. But I wasn't hiding. Because I had the master key. Not to the empire. Not to the vaults. To the story. And the story is the only thing that survives the fire. Sometimes people ask me, do you feel like justice was served? I don't answer. Because I know the truth. Justice doesn't exist in the real world. Only leverage. Only narrative. Only shadowed truths, lit up for a few brief moments before the next empire begins. So I record this now as the final chapter. To say, I'm still here. To say, I see you. To say, I know there's another girl out there, walking toward her first private invite. And I want her to hear this voice and stop. Right there. Before the story begins again. Because this isn't just my confession. It's a weapon.